The call came at 7:43 a.m. on a Tuesday, exactly 6 months and 8 days after they restructured my position. The caller was Otto Fischer, speaking with a heavy German accent, professional, very polite. "Mr. Miller, we have discovered a significant problem with Pinnacle Steel's compliance status. Are you available to discuss this matter?" I was drinking black coffee in my small office above Duffy's Pub on Liberty Avenue, watching the sunrise over the Pittsburgh Steel District. The old smokestacks were mostly cold now, but the Monongahela River still carried the weight of our industrial past. 6 months earlier, I had been Pinnacle's compliance officer. Now, I was about to find out they had made a $285 million mistake. My name is Hank Miller, 48, and I have been keeping steel manufacturing companies legally compliant for 10 years. Before that, I spent 16 years in the Army Corps of Engineers, making sure dams did not fail and bridges did not collapse. It is the same principle, just a different uniform. When something breaks in civil engineering, communities suffer. When compliance breaks in heavy manufacturing, companies die. In the Army Corps, we live by safety margins. In my 16 years with the Army Corps, I worked on the lock and dam systems on the Ohio River. I watched how tiny fractures in concrete, if left unchecked, would slowly eat away at the core until the pressure from a spring flood sheared the entire wall right off its anchors. You do not design a dam to support exactly the normal pool level. You design it to withstand the worst flood in 500 years because you know nature does not care about your budget constraints. Corporate executives today do not understand safety margins. They look at a safety buffer and call it inefficient space. They want to run the engines at maximum temperature with zero cooling time, just to squeeze an extra 2% out of the quarterly dividend. The day that started this whole mess was a Tuesday, too. Brad Vance walked into our quarterly safety meeting and called my compliance team legacy friction with outdated operational overhead. I knew right then Pinnacle Steel was heading for a cliff. Brad had that entitled MBA energy you see everywhere now. He wore an expensive suit, a brand new Apple Watch, and carried the kind of confidence that comes from never actually failing at anything that mattered. He was the nephew of Julian Vance, our longtime CEO. Brad was recently appointed as the VP of Digital Transformation, whatever that meant, in a 98-year-old steel manufacturing company. He did not shake hands when introduced. Instead, he gave finger waves and said things like disruptive innovation and operational agility, while sipping a $15 green smoothie like he had personally invented efficiency. Nobody asked Brad to present that day. Nobody stopped him either. He clicked through a PowerPoint presentation titled Streamlining Legacy Functions Phase 1. Phase 1, it turned out, was gutting my department. I had been Pinnacle's named Clean Air Act Title V responsible official and compliance officer for 10 years. That is 10 years of building safety protocols from scratch, watching regulatory changes sweep through steel manufacturing like hurricanes, and documenting every nightmare scenario the EPA, OSHA, and Department of Transportation could throw at us. I had 4 external audits under my belt with 0 violations. My filing cabinets were organized like an Army logistics system. Everything was labeled, dated, and cross-referenced. The physical plant at Pinnacle was a massive, roaring beast. We operated 3 electric arc furnaces and a hot rolling mill that processed over 800,000 tons of structural steel a year. The noise inside the melt shop was a constant rib-rattling thunder, and the heat would melt the soles of your boots if you stood in one place for too long. Managing compliance for a facility like that was not a matter of checking boxes. It required knowing the physical state of the ductwork, the exact sulfur content of the scrap metal, and the chemical composition of the slag we stored in the yard. Brad did not even know what the EPA's Clean Air Act Title V operating permit meant. I watched him Google it on his phone during the meeting. That morning, he stood there grinning with his uncle's company credit card, called compliance an outdated support function, and suggested we automate oversight using software solutions. My department was redundant, he told the board. We were overstaffed. My $72,000 salary plus $10,500 in benefits would be eliminated. That is $82,500 in annual savings. He bragged, showing a slide with a giant green arrow. He called it a full marketing budget upgrade. Someone at the end of the table actually clapped. I did not. I just capped my pen, closed my notebook, and asked, "Are we done here?" Brad left with his spreadsheet and a satisfied little nod. I went back to my office and opened a fresh binder. It was not anger, it was not even surprise. It was protocol, a military habit. When someone is about to make a catastrophic mistake, you document everything and prepare for damage control. I started backing up files. I backed up every Access credential, every compliance designation, and every legal document where my name appeared as the responsible authority. Most people at Pinnacle did not realize our entire regulatory framework still required my formal signature. Under federal law, specifically the Clean Air Act 42 U.S.C. 74-3 and the EPA regulations under 40 CFR 70.2, Pinnacle's heavy manufacturing operations required a designated responsible official to personally certify the truth, accuracy, and completeness of all environmental and safety reports. Every quarterly filing, every safety certification, and every audit response had Hank Miller listed as the sole primary contact. No replacement had been designated. Nobody could replace me without board approval and formal reassignment paperwork filed with the regulators within 21 calendar days of my vacancy. But Brad did not know that. His uncle Julian, the CEO, probably did not either. They were focused on the numbers, on showing the board how they could cut costs to make the company look more profitable for the upcoming buyout negotiations. I watched them walk into the trap they had set for themselves, and I did not say a word. And at first I thought someone would pump the brakes. Maybe the Human Resources Department would hesitate. Maybe Julian, the CEO, who once called me the guy who keeps us out of federal prison, might speak up. But nothing happened. The HR department sent the reclassification paperwork 4 days later. My position was restructured. My new title was Senior Administrative Coordinator. My security clearance was downgraded, and my invitations to leadership meetings disappeared overnight. I was stripped of my authority but kept on a lower pay scale to handle transition work. I was essentially demoted to a filing clerk while they transitioned my compliance duties to Brad's new automated software platform. The HR director, a woman who had never stepped foot on the melt shop floor in her life, tried to explain it to me with a plastic smile. "Hank, we are just looking to align our support structures with modern digital workflows," she said, sliding the paper across the desk. "This role will let you focus on administrative continuity while Brad's team handles the high-level compliance dashboard." I read the paper. My pay was cut by 30%. I looked up at her, nodded, and signed it. "No problem," I said. "I will make sure the records are in order." She looked relieved. She had probably expected me to scream, to threaten a lawsuit, or to storm out. But military service teaches you that when a commander orders a retreat into a swamp, you do not argue, you just pack extra dry socks and keep your mouth shut until the mud starts filling their boots. My wife passed away 5 years ago, so it was just me and Toby now. The house in Mount Lebanon was paid off, which gave me some breathing room, but CMU's tuition was still $58,000 a year. I had some savings, but not enough to throw away a job on a whim. Yet, I knew that staying in a compromised compliance roles was far riskier than stepping off the boat before it hit the rocks. Brad was ecstatic. He bragged openly about hitting his first operational efficiency target within his first 30 days. He actually gave me a thumbs up in the hallway, slapped me on the shoulder and said, "Good job keeping the wheels turning, Hank M. You were a team player." I smiled and kept walking, so I printed the original board resolution from 2019 that designated me as the Clean Air Act Title V responsible official. I emailed it to my personal account with a timestamp. Then I printed 2 copies of Section 12.3 of our corporate business continuity plan. I had added that clause 4 years ago after watching a competitor in Ohio get hammered with $3.8 million in fines for improper compliance handoffs. The clause was simple. Any change to the designated compliance officer or responsible official must be formally reassigned by board resolution and filed with the EPA and state regulators within 21 calendar days of the vacancy. If no replacement is filed, the designation becomes legally invalid retroactive to the vacancy date. Under federal law, this meant all subsequent filings submitted without a valid responsible official were void ab initio, invalid from the very beginning. Without a valid responsible official, Pinnacle's title operating permits were effectively suspended, meaning they were operating a major source of air pollution without a permit, a direct violation of federal law. I placed one copy of the continuity plan and the 2019 resolution into a binder labeled Regulatory Continuity, Archive Only. I walked down to the legal department storage room. It was a dusty, quiet room in the basement, filled with rows of metal shelving holding decades of corporate history. Nobody went down there except the occasional paralegal looking for an old easement deed. I quietly placed my binder on the fourth shelf, left side, right next to the 2012 environmental impact statements. I did not tell anyone. I did not write an email pointing it out. See, people think revenge needs to be loud. They think it requires dramatic exits and angry speeches about being unappreciated. But nobody appreciates a landmine either until someone steps on it. The real beauty of proper procedure is that it does not need a voice. It just needs time. On day 42 after the restructuring, I submitted my resignation. It was clean and simple. It read, effective 14 days from today, I will be stepping down from my position at Pinnacle Steel Manufacturing. That was it. No drama, no exit interview demands, no company-wide email about being undervalued. They processed it like routine paperwork. The IT department was so rushed to disable my access by the end of my final day that they misspelled my name on the system ticket as Hanak Miller and completely forgot to update the Federal Compliance Registry. They thought disabling my email was the end of their responsibilities. They did not realize they had just started a countdown. My final day was day 56 after the restructuring. I packed my personal items in a single cardboard box, walked out of the building, and drove home. The grace period had begun. Under the rules, Pinnacle Steel had exactly 21 days to file a board resolution and register a new responsible official with the EPA and state authorities. If they missed the deadline, the clock would start running on the violations. My son Toby called that night to check on me. He was a junior at Carnegie Mellon studying mechanical engineering with a minor in compliance systems. He is a smart kid, smarter than his old man in most ways. But he inherited my attention to detail. "Dad, you sure about this?" Toby asked. "What about my tuition? The spring semester is coming up, and that is a lot of money. Trust me." "Son," I told him, "this is going to work out. Your old man did not spend 16 years in the Army Corps without learning how to plan for contingencies." Toby laughed over the phone. "Sounds like you have got something up your sleeve." "I am just following proper procedures," I said. Sometimes that is all it takes in that weekend. I updated my profile on the Federal Compliance Registry. I set my status to active, executive designation relinquished, no replacement filed, effective day 56. Then I registered my new business as an independent consultant specializing in crisis compliance recovery. It was a simple LLC. Within 24 hours of my registry update, my phone started ringing. By Monday, I had 4 serious inquiries. 2 were from regional law firms representing industrial manufacturers in regulatory trouble. 1 was from a boutique consulting group in Philadelphia, and 1 was from Kaiser Steel Industries, a massive German steel conglomerate that specialized in acquiring mid-market American manufacturers. That last inquiry made me smile. I knew Kaiser was looking to expand their footprint in the Rust Belt, and I knew they did not play games when it came to regulatory compliance. Across town, Pinnacle Steel hummed along without missing a beat. There were no exit procedures, no knowledge transfer, and no replacement training. Brad was already planning phase 2 of his digital transformation, which involved cutting the safety inspection team by half. Julian started talking about the company's new agility mindset in local business interviews. Nobody noticed the compliance clock ticking toward day 77, which was the expiration of the 21-day grace period. I set up my new office in a small room above Duffy's Pub on Liberty Avenue. It had 2 desks, a coffee maker that worked half the time, and a view of the old steelworks. Rent was $900 a month. My first consulting contract paid $275 per hour. The math worked out much better than my old salary. Every morning, I would walk downstairs and get coffee from Mick, the old bartender who had run the place for 35 years. We would talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers, the weather, and sometimes about the changing face of the city. Mick knew I had left Pinnacle, but he did not pry. Military guys understand when someone does not want to talk about the past. You know, Hank, Mick said one morning as he wiped down the wooden bar. My grandfather worked the blast furnaces at Homestead. He spent 43 years in those mills and never missed a single day. When they tore down the stacks, he told me something I never forgot. What was that? I asked. He said the young ones always think they can build better than the old ones, but they never ask why the old ones built it that way in the first place. They think the steel just holds itself up. I nodded, taking a sip of the hot coffee. That is the truth, Mick. They do not see the foundations. Mick's grandfather was right. In the old days, a steel mill was built with redundancy. If one valve failed, there was a manual bypass. If one beam corroded, there were three others sharing the load. Brad and his generation of managers looked at redundancy as waste. They wanted to strip away every backup system to save a nickel, not realizing that those backups were the only things keeping the entire structure from collapsing when the wind blew. By day 99, I was fully booked. I got a call from a steel fabrication company in Ohio. They manufactured heavy steel beams for highway overpasses. The Ohio Department of Transportation was threatening to shut down their deliveries because they had not filed their annual welding certification reports, which required a certified inspector's stamp. I spent 3 nights in their record room, going through 2,400 individual welding logs, cross-referencing them with the inspector's credentials, and rebuilding their certification trail from the ground up. By the time I was done, their paperwork was bulletproof, and the DOT inspector signed off on the shipments within 10 minutes of receiving our binder. I charged them $340 per hour plus travel expenses. They agreed before I could even finish the sentence. On day 120, I was on a flight to Texas, helping a steel processing plant navigate a complicated EPA investigation regarding emissions reporting. Their previous compliance team had missed a critical filing deadline. The potential fines were in the millions. My job was to reconstruct their documentation trail, establish a correct baseline, and prove good faith compliance efforts to the regulators. It was military precision and attention to detail. The same skills, just a different battlefield. Meanwhile, the silent clock at Pinnacle Steel kept running. Day 77 had passed, which meant the company was in active violation of federal law. Under the Clean Air Act, operating a steel facility without a designated responsible official carries a daily penalty of $8,000 for minor administrative failures, which escalates to major violations if uncorrected. Because they had no designated officer, every single environmental report, daily emissions log, and safety certification filed after day 77 was legally invalid. On day 167, the escalating fine structure kicked in. Under federal regulations, after 90 days of continuous non-compliance, 90 days after the violation started on day 77, the daily penalty jumped from $8,000 to $25,000. Nobody at Pinnacle knew. The reports were being auto-filed by the software system Brad had set up, signed electronically using a generic corporate credential that had no legal standing under 40 CFR 70.2. The fines were silent, invisible, and accumulating retroactive to the first day of the violation. Toby called me that weekend. He had just been accepted into Carnegie Mellon's Accelerated Compliance Engineering program. It was a new field, growing rapidly due to increased international oversight. Guess who inspired me to look into it? Toby said, "Your old man's bad habits?" I joked. "More like I realized there is massive job security in keeping people out of trouble," Toby said. "Plus, the starting salaries are incredible." My professor said that with all these foreign conglomerates buying up American steel plants, they are desperate for people who understand both the engineering side and the regulatory side. He was right. The steel industry was changing, and Pinnacle was about to find out exactly how much that change cost. Standing on day 200, Pinnacle Steel announced the deal of the century. The press release went out at 9 a.m. and made the front page of the Pittsburgh Business Times. Pinnacle Steel Manufacturing was to be acquired by Kaiser Steel Industries for $285 million. Julian Vance was quoted extensively, talking about Pinnacle's innovative operational transformation under new leadership. Brad was quoted too, positioning himself as the young architect of Pinnacle's lean operational model that had attracted international attention. The article specifically mentioned the strategic elimination of redundant legacy functions as a key factor in Kaiser's interest. I read the article over my morning coffee at Duffy's pub. Mick saw me looking at the front page. "Good news?" Mick asked. "You could say that," I replied. "Sometimes patience pays off." Mick smiled. My grandfather had another saying about the mills. "The furnace that burns the hottest melts the steel, but if you do not tend the fire right, the whole thing comes down." On day 215, the due diligence team from Kaiser Steel Industries arrived in Pittsburgh. They were professional, thorough, and led by Dr. Greta Wagner, an executive who spoke 5 languages and had the kind of attention to detail that made German engineering legendary. Her lead compliance auditor was Otto Fischer, a man who had spent 17 years auditing industrial acquisitions. They spent the first week reviewing financial records, operational metrics, and safety logs. Everything looked clean on the surface. Brad had prepared beautiful digital presentations showing reduced overhead and automated reporting systems. The numbers looked perfect. Julian was already talking about his retirement plans in Florida. The deal was scheduled to close in 2 weeks, on day 229, exactly 173 days after my final day at Pinnacle. Otto Fischer was auditing the legal archives. It was routine due diligence, verifying that all physical certifications matched the electronic filings. He was looking through the physical storage room when he found my binder on the 4th shelf, left side. Regulatory continuity, archive only. Otto opened it. He found the original 2019 board resolution designating Hank Miller as the Clean Air Act Title V responsible official. He found Section 12.3 of the Corporate Business Continuity Plan, which I had highlighted. He saw the 21-day filing requirement. Otto, being a professional, immediately cross-referenced this with the Federal Compliance Registry and Pinnacle's payroll records. The timeline he uncovered was simple and devastating. Hank Miller's final day, day 56, into the 21-day grace period, day 77, current date, day 229, which was 152 days of active regulatory violation from day 77. The math of the fines was brutal. First 90 days of violation, day 77 to day 167, at $8,000 per day equaled $720,000. Remaining 62 days of violation, day 168 to day 229 at $25,000 per day equaled $1,550,000. Total direct fine liability, $2,270,000. But as Otto knew, the fines were only the tip of the iceberg. Because Pinnacle had operated without a designated responsible official, every single environmental filing, emissions report, and safety log submitted during those 152 days was void ab initio. They had no legal validity. This meant Pinnacle had been operating without a valid federal permit for over 5 months. On top of that, they had represented to Kaiser Steel Industries that they were in full compliance with all federal and state laws. Under the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, Section 302 and SEC Rule 10b-5, this was a material misrepresentation of the company's financial and regulatory status, which carried severe criminal and civil liabilities for the officers who signed the buyout disclosures. If they proceeded with the buyout under these false representations, the board members could face personal liability for breach of fiduciary duty, and the company could be charged with federal securities fraud. At 9:15 a.m. on Thursday, Otto Fischer walked into the Pinnacle boardroom, where Julian, Brad, and their legal team were reviewing the final acquisition documents. Otto carried my physical binder. "Ho is Hank Miller?" Otto asked, placing the binder in the center of the conference table. Brad looked up, annoyed by the interruption. He was a legacy employee. We restructured his department last year as part of our digital transition. He is no longer with the company, but he is still listed as your sole designated Clean Air Act responsible official," Otto said, opening the binder and pointing to the Federal Registry printout. "And according to your own business continuity charter, his designation became invalid 21 days after his departure because no replacement was filed." Julian leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "That is impossible. The transition was handled months ago by HR." Otto shook his head. "Federal compliance designations are not automatic. They require a formal board resolution and official filing with the regulators. You have been operating in violation of federal law for 152 days. Every report you have filed during this time is legally invalid." and the boardroom went completely silent. Julian's face turned white. Brad started typing furiously on his phone, while the lead corporate counsel began sweating through his shirt. "It is a procedural oversight," Brad stammered, trying to laugh it off. "It is just paperwork. We can bring Hank back for a day, file the forms retroactively, and clear this up." "No, you cannot," Dr. Greta Wagner said, entering the room and closing her laptop. "You cannot retroactively certify federal environmental reports that were submitted under false credentials. That is a violation of the Clean Air Act, 42 U.S.C. 7413, and it constitutes a material breach of the representations you made during our negotiations. Under federal law, submitting reports with invalid signatures can be treated as a criminal offense if it is done knowingly or through gross negligence." "But Dr. Wagner," Julian pleaded, his voice shaking, "we can resolve this. The acquisition is set to close next week." "I am afraid that is impossible," Dr. Wagner replied. "Your current fine exposure is already $2,270,000, and it is increasing by $25,000 every single day. More importantly, your company has been operating without valid operating permits. The liability exposure for Kaiser Steel is unacceptable. We cannot purchase an entity that is facing federal prosecution and potential shutdown orders. On top of that, under the Warren Act 29 U.S.C. 2101, if this compliance failure forces a shutdown of the furnaces, you would be liable for 60 days of back pay for all 350 workers because you failed to provide proper notice of an operational stoppage. Your board has committed a severe breach of fiduciary duty by allowing this violation to occur and failing to disclose it." The Kaiser due diligence team packed their bags and left the building by noon. That afternoon, they sent a formal notification terminating the acquisition agreement, citing material misrepresentation and failure of corporate governance. The news leaked to the press by Monday morning. The headline in the Pittsburgh Business Times read, "Kaiser Steel withdraws from $285 Pinnacle acquisition citing regulatory violations." Pinnacle's stock opened down 19% on Monday. By the time the market closed, it had dropped 33%. Wiping out decades of shareholder value in a matter of hours. The board of directors called an emergency meeting. Julian Vance was forced into early retirement, losing his golden parachute and facing potential shareholder lawsuits for breach of fiduciary duty. Brad Vance was terminated for cause, his reputation in the Pittsburgh business community completely destroyed. On Tuesday, my phone rang. It was Dr. Greta Wagner. "Mr. Miller," she said, "we have reviewed the documentation you left in the Pinnacle archives. It was exceptionally thorough. Kaiser Steel is looking for a director of compliance to oversee our entire North American operation. We need someone who knows how to build safety systems, not just run reports. We are prepared to offer you a 16-month contract at $275 per hour with full autonomy. Are you interested?" I looked out the window of my office above Duffy's pub. "Yes, Dr. Wagner," I said, "I am interested." 6 months later, I moved into my new office on the 17th floor of the Kaiser Steel building, overlooking the Monongahela River. My job was to oversee the compliance of 11 manufacturing plants across 7 states. The work was familiar, but the scale was massive. I hired 3 junior compliance engineers to help me manage the workload. One of them was Toby, who had just graduated near the top of his class at Carnegie Mellon. Pinnacle Steel was eventually liquidated. The assets were sold off to pay the federal fines, which had reached $2.3 million by the time the settlement was finalized. The old headquarters building was leased to a tech company, and Brad's digital transformation files were thrown into a dumpster. One evening, I walked down to Duffy's pub for a cup of coffee. Mick was wiping down the bar, just like he had done for decades. "How is the view from the 17th floor, Hank?" Mick asked. "It is good, Mick," I said, "but the coffee is better down here." Mick laughed and poured me a fresh cup. "My grandfather was right about those furnaces, you know." "He was," I said. "The people who build the systems know how they work. The people who just want to cut costs usually end up getting burned by the fire. Some people spend their entire careers trying to be noticed, but I spent mine making sure the foundations were solid. And when the walls came down, the safety protocols worked exactly the way they were designed to. Business is good, really good. It just took them $285 million to figure out why they needed a compliance officer in the first place.